For 6 months, Naomi Brooks brought breakfast to a homeless old man every single morning at the Maple Avenue transit stop. A peanut butter sandwich, a banana, a cup of hot coffee. Nothing more. Nothing less. Most people never noticed the old man. They hurried past him with their heads down and their phones in their hands. Some crossed the street to avoid him. Others looked straight through him, as if he didn't exist. But Naomi always stopped. Every morning at 6:15. Every morning, without fail. She didn't know that the man sleeping beneath the faded bus shelter had once flown classified missions for the United States government. She didn't know he had saved lives in places that officially never existed. She didn't know powerful people still owed him debts they could never repay. All she knew was that he was hungry. Then one autumn morning, 2 weeks after his funeral, 3 military officers arrived at Naomi's apartment before sunrise. Their dress uniforms gleamed beneath the flickering hallway light. The colonel standing in front carried a sealed folder stamped with government markings. When Naomi opened the door, still wearing her nurse's aide uniform and holding a half-finished cup of instant coffee, her stomach dropped. "Miss Naomi Brooks?" the colonel asked. "Yes." The officer removed his cap. His expression was solemn. "We're here because of Walter Grayson." The name hit her like a punch. Walter, the homeless veteran, the man she had fed every day, the man who had died alone, the man nobody cared about, or so she had believed. The colonel took a slow breath. "General Eleanor Whitmore has requested your presence in Virginia." Naomi stared at him. "What for?" The colonel looked directly into her eyes. "Because Walter Grayson left a letter." A long pause followed. "And according to that letter," he said quietly, "you may be the most important witness in one of the largest failures our veteran care system has ever seen." Everything Naomi thought she knew about Walter Grayson was about to change. And so was her life. 7 months earlier, Naomi Brooks was surviving one day at a time. At 22 years old, she lived alone in a tiny 4th-floor apartment that smelled faintly of mildew and old paint. The building should have been condemned years ago. The elevator hadn't worked in months, and the heating system seemed to function only when it felt generous. Every bill on her kitchen counter carried red letters: past due, final notice, immediate payment required. Her refrigerator was almost empty. Half a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, a carton containing 2 eggs, nothing else. Naomi stared at the shelves and sighed. Her hospital cafeteria shift started in less than an hour. After that, she would work another 6-hour shift stocking shelves at a grocery store. Then she would attend an evening nursing class. Then she would sleep for 4 hours before doing it all again. The routine never changed. The exhaustion never left. She checked her bank account. $37. Rent was due in 4 days. An eviction warning was already taped to her apartment door. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Sometimes she wondered how much longer she could keep fighting, but giving up wasn't an option. It never had been. Naomi had learned that lesson years ago. Her mother had died when Naomi was 16. Cancer. No insurance. No savings. No miracle. Just bills. After that, life became a series of jobs, sacrifices, and impossible choices. Every morning, she walked 3 blocks to the Maple Avenue transit stop. Every morning, she saw the same old man sleeping beneath the shelter. Gray beard, worn coat, army boots held together with tape, a blanket that looked older than she was. For 2 weeks, she walked past him. Then, one cold March morning, she stopped. Not because she had extra food, because she didn't. Not because she could afford to help, because she couldn't. She simply looked at the sandwich in her hand and realized she couldn't eat it while someone else sat hungry 10 feet away. The old man was awake when she approached. His blue eyes were surprisingly sharp. They studied her carefully. Naomi held out the sandwich. "Would you like this?" For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he looked at her. "You need it more than I do." The answer surprised her. Most hungry people would have grabbed it instantly. Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe." She pushed it closer. "But I'm offering anyway." The old man accepted it with both hands, not greedily, not desperately, almost respectfully, as if she had handed him something valuable. "Thank you," he said. His voice was calm, educated, unexpected. "I'm Walter." "Naomi." He nodded. Nice to meet you, Naomi Brooks. She blinked. I never told you my last name. A small smile appeared beneath his beard. I pay attention. For the first time, Naomi laughed. It wasn't much. Just a sandwich. Just a stranger. Just one small act of kindness. Neither of them knew that moment would eventually change both of their lives forever. The next morning, Naomi brought coffee. The morning after that, she brought a banana. By the end of the week, bringing breakfast to Walter Grayson had become part of her routine. Every day at 6:15. Every day before work. Every day before the rest of the city woke up. At first, they spoke only for a few minutes. Weather, bus schedules, hospital work. Nothing important. Then Walter began telling stories. Strange stories. Stories that sounded impossible. I once landed a helicopter on a mountain ridge in a snowstorm, Walter said one morning. Naomi handed him a coffee. Sure you did. Walter smiled. You don't believe me? No. Smart girl. Naomi laughed. Walter laughed too. Yet there was something unusual about the way he told his stories. No exaggeration. No bragging. No desperate need to impress. He simply spoke as though he were remembering yesterday. A few days later, he told her about evacuating diplomats from a war zone. Another morning, he described flying government officials through hostile territory. On another day, he casually mentioned meeting senators. Every story sounded more unbelievable than the last. Naomi assumed he was confused. Most people did. But even if his stories weren't true, she enjoyed listening. Walter had a way of making ordinary mornings feel interesting. More importantly, he listened when she talked. Really listened. One chilly April morning, Naomi arrived looking exhausted. She had worked until midnight, studied until 2, slept less than 3 hours. Walter noticed immediately. You're running yourself into the ground. I'm fine. No. His voice was firm. You're surviving. That's different. Naomi looked away. Nobody usually noticed things like that. Walter always did. A few seconds passed. You ever think about quitting one of your jobs? He asked. Naomi laughed bitterly. You volunteering to pay my rent? Walter grinned. Not currently. For a moment, they both smiled. Then the smile faded, because both of them knew the truth. Naomi wasn't joking. Neither was Walter. That same week, something happened neither of them forgot. A businessman in an expensive suit walked past the bus shelter during rush hour. Walter was sitting quietly beneath his blanket, not bothering anyone. Not asking for money, not even speaking. The businessman stopped, looked down, and kicked Walter's coffee onto the sidewalk. The cup exploded. Coffee splashed across Walter's blanket. The man started walking away. Naomi had just stepped off her bus. She saw everything. Hey! Her voice echoed across the street. The businessman stopped, turned. What? What is wrong with you? Several pedestrians slowed down. The businessman shrugged. He's blocking public property. Walter lowered his eyes, but Naomi wasn't finished. He's a human being. The businessman rolled his eyes. Whatever. He turned and continued walking. Naomi stormed after him. Maybe one day you'll need help too. The man never looked back. Silence settled over the sidewalk. Walter slowly picked up the ruined cup. His hands trembled slightly. Not from age, from humiliation. Naomi knelt beside him. Without saying a word, she removed her scarf and wiped coffee from his blanket. Walter stared at her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. You shouldn't waste your energy defending old men. Naomi kept cleaning. Good thing nobody asked your opinion. That earned a genuine laugh, a real one. The first she'd ever heard from him. When she finished, Walter folded the blanket carefully. Then he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite understand. Pride, sadness, gratitude, maybe all three. You've got courage, he said softly. Naomi shrugged. I just don't like bullies. Walter's eyes drifted toward the busy street, toward people hurrying past without seeing either of them, then back to her. That's not what I mean. Something in his tone made her pause. You've got the kind of courage that costs something. He looked away, like he was remembering something painful. One day, he continued quietly, that courage is going to be tested. Naomi frowned. What does that mean? Walter gave a small smile. The kind that carried secrets. I guess we'll find out. For the first time since she'd met him, Naomi felt a strange chill run down her spine, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. Walter's words stayed with Naomi long after she boarded the bus. You've got the kind of courage that costs something. At the time, she thought he was being dramatic. A few weeks later, she realized he wasn't. Life was getting harder. Much harder. One rainy Tuesday evening, Naomi climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment and found a bright orange notice taped to her door. Final warning. Payment required within 7 days. Her stomach dropped. She didn't need to read the rest. She already knew what it said. Rent. Again. She pulled the paper free and stepped inside. The apartment was cold. Too cold. She flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. For a moment, she simply stood there. Then she tried again. Still nothing. The power company had finally done it. After 3 months of notices, threats, and payment plans, they had shut off her electricity. A laugh escaped her throat. Not because anything was funny, because she was too exhausted to cry. She sank onto the floor beside the refrigerator. The refrigerator that no longer worked. The refrigerator that barely contained any food anyway. Inside were 2 eggs, half a loaf of bread, and a nearly empty jar of peanut butter. That was all. Naomi buried her face in her hands. For the first time in months, she felt something dangerous creeping into her thoughts. Hopelessness. Maybe she couldn't do this anymore. Maybe she was losing a fight she could never win. Her phone buzzed. A text message from Mrs. Evelyn Chen. Still alive? Naomi smiled weakly. Barely. A reply arrived seconds later. Good. Be at work at 6. Don't be late. For some reason, that simple message helped. Just enough. The next morning, Naomi woke before dawn. The apartment was freezing. She dressed in the dark, packed 2 sandwiches, one for herself, one for Walter. Then she stopped. She stared at the food. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten a real meal in almost 2 days. Slowly, she picked up Walter's sandwich. Then she put it back down, picked it up again, put it down again. The battle lasted nearly a minute. Finally, she wrapped both sandwiches, one for Walter, one for herself. At least, that had been the plan. When she reached the Maple Avenue transit stop, Walter immediately noticed something was wrong. You look terrible. Good morning to you, too. You haven't been eating. Naomi rolled her eyes. And you're suddenly a doctor? No. Walter accepted the coffee she handed him. I just know what hunger looks like. The words hit harder than she expected. Naomi looked away. Walter studied her face, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the exhaustion, the forced smile. Then his gaze dropped to her hands. No breakfast, no coffee, nothing. He understood instantly. Without a word, Walter broke his sandwich in half. He handed one piece back. Naomi frowned. What are you doing? Eating breakfast. That's your food. Walter shook his head. No. His voice was calm. It's ours. Naomi felt emotion rise unexpectedly inside her chest. She hated feeling vulnerable, especially in front of people. But Walter wasn't really people anymore. Not ordinary people. Walter had become something else. A friend. Maybe the only real friend she had. I'm fine, she whispered. Walter didn't move. Didn't argue. Didn't lecture. Simply held out the sandwich, the same way she had months earlier. The memory hit her immediately. You need it more than I do. That's what he had told her. Now, their positions were reversed. Naomi slowly accepted the sandwich. For several minutes, they sat together in silence, sharing breakfast beneath the old bus shelter. Cars rushed past. People hurried to work. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. But for those few minutes, neither of them felt completely alone. Then Walter spoke quietly. You know, I had a family once. Naomi turned toward him. It was the first time he had ever mentioned his past. His eyes remained fixed on the street. My wife. A pause. My son. Another pause. They're gone now. The sadness in his voice felt ancient, like something carried for decades. What happened? Naomi asked softly. Walter's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he did. The job followed me home. That was all he said. But somehow it felt like the saddest thing she'd ever heard. A long silence followed. Then Walter stood unexpectedly. His knees trembled slightly. His balance seemed worse than usual. "You okay?" Naomi asked. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. For the first time since she'd met him, Walter looked old, not wise, not mysterious, just tired, very tired. And as Naomi watched him lower himself back onto the bench, a terrible thought entered her mind. What if one day he simply wasn't there? What if she arrived one morning and found only an empty bus stop? The idea frightened her more than she wanted to admit, and deep down she sensed that day might be coming sooner than either of them expected. The next morning, Walter Grayson was gone. At first, Naomi didn't think much of it. People moved around, especially homeless people. Sometimes the city forced them to relocate. Sometimes shelters found temporary beds. Sometimes they simply disappeared for a few days and came back. That had to be what happened. It had to. She stood beneath the Maple Avenue transit stop, holding a paper bag with breakfast inside. Peanut butter sandwich, banana, coffee. The same as always. The bus arrived. Walter wasn't there. The second bus arrived. Still nothing. Finally, Naomi forced herself to leave for work. All day, she felt distracted. Every few minutes, she caught herself looking at the cafeteria doors, half expecting Walter to somehow walk through them. Of course, he never did. The next morning, the shelter was still empty. So was the morning after that. By the fourth day, concern had become fear. Mrs. Evelyn Chen noticed immediately. "You look awful." Naomi was wiping tables after lunch. "I haven't been sleeping." "Why?" Naomi hesitated. Because saying it out loud sounded ridiculous. Because she wasn't family, wasn't even really a friend. Just a girl who brought breakfast. Yet somehow, it felt much bigger than that. The old man from the bus stop disappeared. Mrs. Chen immediately understood. "Walter?" Naomi nodded. "You checked the shelters?" "No." Mrs. Chen crossed her arms. "Then stop worrying and start looking." That evening, Naomi took 2 buses across town to Hope Haven Shelter. The receptionist barely glanced up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone." The woman sighed. "Name?" "Walter Grayson." The receptionist typed for several seconds. Nothing. She shook her head. "Not here." "What about recently?" "No record." Naomi felt her stomach tighten. "Could you check again?" The woman gave her a sympathetic look. "I already did." Outside, rain began falling. Cold. Steady. Relentless. Naomi stood beneath the awning and stared into the darkness. For the first time, she admitted something to herself. She was scared. Not worried, scared. Walter was old. His health had been getting worse. What if something had happened? What if he was lying in a hospital somewhere? Or worse? The thought made her chest hurt. Over the next 3 days, she searched everywhere she could. More shelters, outreach centers, emergency rooms. No answers. No Walter. By the 7th day, exhaustion was replacing hope. That morning, Naomi returned to the bus stop, carrying breakfast she knew nobody would eat. The shelter sat empty. The bench sat empty. The sidewalk felt wrong without him. She lowered the paper bag onto the seat, then pulled a scrap of paper from her pocket. "Hope you're okay, Naomi." She tucked the note beneath the bag. For several seconds, she simply stood there. Then she turned away. A voice stopped her. "Miss Brooks." Naomi froze. Her heart nearly stopped. Slowly, she turned around. Walter was sitting beneath the shelter, exactly where he always sat. For one impossible moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then she ran. "Where have you been?" Walter smiled weakly. The smile disappeared almost immediately. He looked terrible, far worse than before. His face was pale, his cheeks were hollow, his hands shook. Even sitting upright seemed difficult. "I've had better weeks." Naomi dropped onto the bench beside him. "I looked everywhere." The words came out sharper than she intended. Shelters, hospitals, outreach centers. For a second, Walter looked genuinely surprised. "You did?" "Of course I did." Something flickered across his face. Gratitude. Maybe even guilt. "I didn't mean to worry you." "You vanished." Walter looked away. The silence that followed felt different, heavy. Then Naomi noticed something. A fresh scar on the back of his hand. Thin. Pink. Recently healed. Not an accident.
Not a scrape.
Something surgical. Her eyes narrowed. Walter. He immediately knew what she had seen. No. What happened to your hand? Nothing. That's obviously not true. Walter pulled his sleeve lower. His voice became firm. Drop it. Naomi stared at him. He had never spoken to her like that before. Not once. For several seconds, neither of them said anything. Then Walter sighed. The anger vanished. Only exhaustion remained. Slowly, he reached into his coat, pulled out a sealed envelope. White. Worn. Carefully protected. He held it toward her. Naomi frowned. What's this? If something happens to me, Walter said quietly, mail it. Every instinct inside her rebelled. No. His eyes met hers. Serious. Steady. Promise me. Walter. Promise. The word carried unusual weight, like an order, like a final request, like something far bigger than either of them. Reluctantly, Naomi accepted the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. What is it? Walter smiled faintly. Insurance. She didn't understand. Not even a little. But she slipped the envelope into her bag, then looked back at him. Something about the way he was watching the street frightened her. Not fear of death. Not exactly. More like a man waiting for unfinished business to finally catch up with him. And for the first time since she had met Walter Grayson, Naomi realized he might be carrying secrets far larger than either of them had ever admitted. For the next 2 weeks, Walter tried to act as though nothing had changed, but Naomi could see it. Every day, every conversation, every movement. The old man who once seemed indestructible was fading. His hands shook more. His breathing sounded heavier. Sometimes he lost his train of thought in the middle of a sentence. Other times, he stared into the distance as though watching memories nobody else could see. Naomi hated it, because she knew exactly what it meant. She had watched her mother disappear the same way, little by little, day by day, until one morning there was nothing left to fight. The thought terrified her, so she ignored it, pretended everything was fine, pretended Walter would somehow recover, pretended she wasn't counting every morning they still had together. Then came Thursday, the day everything changed. The sky was gray. Cold wind swept through the streets. Naomi arrived at the Maple Avenue transit stop, carrying breakfast and 2 coffees. Walter looked exhausted. Even sitting upright appeared difficult. You should be in a hospital. Walter smiled faintly. You say that every day. Because it's true. I've survived worse. Naomi handed him his coffee. Walter reached for it. His hand trembled violently. The cup slipped. Coffee splashed across the sidewalk. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Walter's eyes rolled backward. Walter! The old man's body lurched sideways. His head struck the bench. Then he collapsed onto the pavement. Hard. The sound made Naomi's blood run cold. Walter! She dropped beside him. No response. His face had turned gray. His breathing was shallow. Wrong. Everything looked wrong. People nearby stopped walking. Several gathered around. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. They simply stared. Naomi grabbed Walter's wrist. No pulse. For one horrifying moment, her mind went completely blank. Number. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not like this. Then her nursing training took over. She rolled Walter onto his back, checked again. Still nothing. Panic exploded inside her chest. Call 911. The scream echoed across the street. A woman pulled out her phone. Several people jumped backward. Naomi interlocked her hands, positioned them over Walter's chest, and started compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't notice, didn't care. Come on! 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. Again, and again, and again. Traffic blurred around her. Voices disappeared. The world narrowed to one thing. Walter. His life. Nothing else mattered. A memory flashed through her mind. Walter sharing his sandwich. Walter defending her when she doubted herself. Walter laughing beneath the bus shelter. Walter calling her brave. Not today. He wasn't leaving today.
"Stay with me."
Her voice cracked. Another round of compressions, still nothing. The crowd had grown larger. People were filming, watching, whispering. Naomi wanted to scream at them. Instead, she kept fighting. Her arms burned, her shoulders ached, her entire body trembled. Then suddenly, a weak gasp. Walter's chest jerked. Air entered his lungs. Naomi froze. For half a second, she couldn't believe it. Then another breath came. Weak, uneven, but there. "Oh, thank God." The words escaped as a sob. Sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder, closer. 2 ambulances raced around the corner. Paramedics rushed forward. Equipment, monitors, questions, movement everywhere. One medic checked Walter. Another attached sensors. A third looked up. "Who performed CPR?" Naomi raised a shaking hand. The medic stared at her, then nodded. "You saved his life." The words barely registered. She climbed into the ambulance before anyone could stop her. Inside, paramedics worked furiously. An oxygen mask covered Walter's face. Machines beeped. Numbers flashed. One paramedic glanced toward her. "Family?" "No." The answer caught in her throat. She stopped. What was she? Not family. Not a relative. Not even someone who should legally be there. Yet leaving had never crossed her mind. The medic waited. Finally, Naomi spoke. "I'm the only person he's got." The paramedic looked at Walter, then at her, and simply nodded. The ambulance sped toward Riverside Medical Center. Rain pounded the roof. Sirens screamed through traffic. Walter remained unconscious, motionless, fragile. For the first time since meeting him, Naomi realized how close she had come to losing him forever. But an even bigger shock was waiting, because within hours, a hospital computer would uncover a classified military record, a record that would prove Walter Grayson had never been just a homeless old man, and nothing in Naomi's life would ever be the same again. The first thing Naomi noticed when she entered Walter's hospital room 3 days later was the silence. No traffic, no cold wind, no buses roaring past, no people pretending not to see him, just quiet. Walter lay in a clean hospital bed beneath white blankets. Machines hummed softly around him. An IV line disappeared into his arm. For the first time since she had met him, he looked safe. And somehow, that made Naomi unexpectedly emotional. She stood in the doorway for several seconds before walking inside. Walter opened his eyes. A faint smile appeared. "Took you long enough." Naomi laughed despite herself. "You almost died." A slight exaggeration. "You literally stopped breathing." Walter considered this. Fair point. The smile faded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Walter glanced toward the window. "You know what the funny part is?" "What?" "I've landed helicopters under enemy fire." Naomi rolled her eyes. "Here we go." Walter chuckled softly. "I've been shot at." "Sure." "I've crashed twice." "Of course you have, but a failing heart nearly gets me." For the first time, Naomi didn't dismiss the story, not after what she had learned. The hospital had run a military records check and found something strange, something classified. Most of the file had been blacked out, entire sections hidden, entire decades erased. Even the doctors had looked confused. Walter noticed her expression. "So?" His eyes twinkled. "You finally believe me." Naomi sat beside the bed. "I believe there's something you're not telling me." Walter laughed. A genuine laugh. One that ended in a coughing fit. When it passed, he looked suddenly tired, older. The years seemed to settle onto his shoulders all at once. "You ever regret anything?" Naomi asked, quietly. Walter stared at the ceiling. For a long time, he didn't answer. Then he nodded. "Lots of things." His voice had changed, lost its humor. "I regret missing birthdays." A pause. "Anniversaries." Another pause. "I regret letting the job become more important than the people waiting for me at home." Naomi listened carefully. This wasn't one of Walter's stories. This was something deeper, something real. "My wife used to tell me I'd disappear one day." His eyes remained fixed on the ceiling. Turns out, she was right. "What happened to her?" Walter swallowed. "Cancer." Naomi froze. The word struck close to home, too close. My son died 3 years later. The room fell silent. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Loss recognized loss. Pain recognized pain. Finally, Walter looked toward her. What about you? Naomi stared down at her hands. My mother. Walter nodded slowly. He already knew. Not because she had told him, because he recognized the look in her eyes. The same one he saw in the mirror every morning. For a while, they sat quietly. Two people from completely different worlds, connected by grief neither had fully escaped. Then Walter reached into the bedside drawer, pulled out a small notebook. The cover was old, worn, used. He handed it to her. Naomi frowned. What's this? My memory. She opened it. Every page was filled. Names, dates, locations, phone numbers, strange notes, military references, pieces of information written in careful handwriting. What am I looking at? Walter leaned back against the pillow. The things that matter. That doesn't explain anything. It will, someday. Naomi looked up. Walter's expression had changed again. Serious. Almost urgent. As if he knew time was running short. Slowly, she slipped the notebook into her bag. Beside the sealed envelope he had already given her. 2 mysteries. 2 promises. Neither made sense. Not yet. Weeks passed. Walter was eventually transferred to Silver Creek Veterans Center. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, warm. For the first time in years, Walter had a room, a bed, 3 meals a day, people who knew his name. Naomi visited whenever she could, sometimes twice a week, sometimes 3 times, even when she was exhausted, even when money was tight. One evening she arrived carrying a large shopping bag. Walter raised an eyebrow. What'd you do? Nothing. You look guilty. Naomi pulled a thick navy blue blanket from the bag, the softest blanket Walter had seen in years. His eyes widened. Naomi. Don't. You shouldn't have spent money on me. Too late. Walter stared at the blanket, then at her. Then back at the blanket, his eyes filled with tears. Real tears. The kind no soldier wants anyone to see. No one's bought me anything in 20 years. The confession hung heavily in the room. Naomi carefully draped the blanket across his lap. Then somebody was overdue. Walter couldn't speak. For several moments, he simply sat there, touching the fabric, holding on to it as if it were something priceless. Maybe it was, because it wasn't really a blanket. It was proof. Proof that someone still cared whether he existed. And as Naomi watched him quietly wipe away tears, she felt an uneasy certainty growing inside her. Walter Grayson was preparing for something. Not recovery. Not a new beginning. An ending. And deep down, she feared there wasn't much time left. The phone rang at 5:42 on a Tuesday morning. Naomi was standing in her tiny kitchen, waiting for water to boil for instant coffee. The sound startled her. Almost nobody called that early. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. Then she noticed the caller ID. Silver Creek Veterans Center. A feeling of dread immediately settled into her chest. She answered. Hello? The voice on the other end was gentle. Professional. Too gentle. Miss Brooks? Yes. This is Angela from Silver Creek. The pause that followed lasted less than a second. But Naomi already knew. Somehow, she already knew. I'm calling about Walter Grayson. The coffee mug slipped from her hand. It struck the counter. Fortunately, it didn't break. Her heart did. He passed away peacefully during the night. The words echoed through her mind. Distant. Unreal. Meaningless. For several seconds, she couldn't respond. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Angela continued speaking softly, explaining details, offering condolences, asking if Naomi could come collect Walter's belongings. Naomi heard none of it. Only one sentence. Walter Grayson is gone. Gone. The old man from the bus stop. The man who shared his sandwich. The man who saw through every lie she told about being fine. The man who somehow became family. Gone. By the time the call ended, Naomi was sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at nothing. The apartment felt impossibly quiet. A strange numbness settled over her, the kind that comes when grief is too large to process. She called work, then nursing class, then simply sat there. Hours passed before she finally left for Silver Creek. The staff greeted her kindly. They had all liked Walter. That surprised her. For years, nobody had cared whether he existed. Now, people spoke about him with affection, respect. One nurse smiled sadly. He talked about you constantly. Naomi looked down, unable to answer. They handed her a plastic bag. Inside were Walter's possessions: 3 shirts, 2 books, a worn wallet, the blue blanket she had given him, and a smaller envelope with her name written across the front. Naomi froze. The handwriting was unmistakable. Walter's. She opened it immediately. Inside was a photograph, nothing else. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then she looked closer. Her pulse quickened. The man standing in the center was Walter, only younger. Much younger. His military uniform was immaculate. Rows of medals covered his chest. His posture was perfect. Confidence radiated from him. On one side stood a senator. Naomi recognized him instantly from television. On the other stood a high-ranking government official. Walter had never been lying. Not once. The stories, the missions, the helicopters, all of it. Every impossible thing. Every unbelievable detail. True. Her hands trembled. She flipped the photograph over. 3 words had been written on the back. Remember the girl. Nothing else. No explanation. No signature. Just those 3 words. Naomi swallowed hard. By the time she returned home, evening had fallen. The apartment felt emptier than ever. She sat on her mattress, placed Walter's belongings beside her, then noticed something. The sealed envelope. The one Walter had given her weeks earlier. The one she had promised to mail if anything happened. For several minutes, she simply stared at it. The weight of the promise felt enormous now. Finally, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long, and another copy of the photograph. At the top was an address, General Eleanor Whitmore. Naomi frowned. She had never heard the name. Then she began reading. To whoever receives this, if this letter has reached you, I'm dead. The opening line hit like a punch. Naomi continued. Every word grew heavier. Walter wrote about his life, his service, his mistakes, the years he spent disappearing into homelessness, the government agencies that lost track of him, the system that forgot him. Then the letter changed. Suddenly, it wasn't about Walter anymore. It was about Naomi. Her eyes filled with tears as she read. For 6 months, Naomi Brooks brought me breakfast every morning. Not because she wanted recognition, not because she expected anything in return. She did it because she saw a human being where everyone else saw a problem. Walter described her sacrifices, her kindness, her courage, the way she treated him with dignity when nobody else would. Then came the final paragraph. This country forgot me. Naomi Brooks didn't. If there is any honor left in the institutions I once served, remember her the way she remembered me. Walter Grayson. The room fell silent. Naomi wiped tears from her cheeks. Then she looked at the address again. General Eleanor Whitmore. Whoever she was, Walter believed she mattered. And Walter had trusted Naomi with this final mission. The next morning, she stood in line at the post office. The envelope felt unusually heavy, as if it carried more than paper, more than words, maybe an entire life. When her turn arrived, she slid it across the counter. The clerk stamped it, dropped it into a bin, and just like that, it disappeared. Naomi watched it go, certain she would never hear about it again. Certain Walter's story would end there. She couldn't have been more wrong, because 2 weeks later, before sunrise, 3 military officers would knock on her apartment door, and everything would change. The knock came at exactly 6:03 a.m. Firm, deliberate, official. Naomi had been pulling on her work shoes when it sounded through the apartment. At first, she assumed it was her landlord, maybe another warning, maybe another bill she couldn't pay. The knock came again. 3 sharp taps. Her stomach tightened. When she opened the door, 3 uniformed military officers stood in the hallway. The sight instantly stole her breath. Their dress uniforms were immaculate, every crease perfect, every medal polished. The man standing in front removed his cap. Miss Naomi Brooks? Yes. I'm Colonel Nathan Calloway. He gestured toward the two officers behind him. Lieutenant Ryan Mercer, Lieutenant Ethan Holloway. Nobody smiled. Nobody looked relaxed. Whatever this was, it was serious. Naomi's pulse quickened. Did something happen? Colonel Calloway exchanged a glance with the others. Then he spoke. We're here because of Walter Grayson. The name hit harder than she expected. Even after 2 weeks, hearing it still hurt. What about him? The colonel studied her carefully. General Eleanor Whitmore received his letter. Naomi froze. The letter. The one she mailed. The one she believed would disappear forever. She wants to meet you. For several seconds, Naomi simply stared. Me? Yes, ma'am. Why? The colonel's expression softened slightly. Because Walter Grayson wasn't who you thought he was. 3 days later, Naomi found herself sitting on an airplane for the first time in her life. She barely noticed the view. Barely noticed takeoff. Her mind kept returning to the same question. Who was Walter really? Colonel Calloway sat across the aisle. Professional. Quiet. Impossible to read. Whenever Naomi asked questions, his answers remained frustratingly vague. You'll understand soon. That was all he ever said. The plane landed in Virginia shortly after noon. A government vehicle waited outside. The ride lasted almost an hour. Eventually, they arrived at a secure federal complex. The building wasn't flashy. No giant signs, no dramatic entrances, just layers of security. Guards, checkpoints, badges, locked doors. The kind of place where important things happened quietly. Colonel Calloway escorted her through a maze of hallways. Finally, they stopped outside a private office. A brass plaque beside the door read, General Eleanor Whitmore. The colonel knocked. A calm voice answered. Come in. Naomi stepped inside. The woman behind the desk immediately stood. She looked to be in her early 60s. Silver hair, sharp eyes. Command seemed to radiate from her, naturally. General Whitmore crossed the room and offered her hand. Miss Brooks. Naomi shook it. The general's grip was firm. Confident. Thank you for coming. Naomi sat carefully, unsure what to expect. The general opened a thick file. Walter's file. Naomi recognized the name immediately. For several moments, General Whitmore simply stared at it. Then she spoke. Do you know how long we've been looking for Walter Grayson? Naomi shook her head. No. 15 years. The answer stunned her. What? General Whitmore nodded. 15 years. She slid a photograph across the desk. Naomi recognized it immediately. The same photograph Walter had left behind. Only this copy was larger, clearer, official. Walter was one of our most valuable intelligence officers. Naomi stared. The words barely registered. He flew covert operations during multiple conflicts. The general opened another folder. More photographs, more documents, mission reports, military records, classified stamps, black redaction bars, pages upon pages. He extracted diplomats from active combat zones. Another page. He evacuated intelligence assets under enemy fire. Another page. He flew missions that officially never happened. Naomi's heart pounded. Every unbelievable story Walter had ever told suddenly returned. The helicopters, the senators, the rescues, the secret missions, all of it had been true. Every single word. General Whitmore continued. Several high-ranking officials are alive today because of Walter Grayson. Naomi swallowed hard. Then another question surfaced. If he was so important, her voice faltered. Why was he homeless? The room fell silent. General Whitmore closed the file. For the first time, genuine sadness appeared in her eyes. Because we failed him. The honesty caught Naomi off guard. No excuses. No deflection. Just truth. The general leaned back. PTSD. A pause. Bureaucratic errors. Another pause. Lost records. She tapped the folder. When Walter retired, portions of his classified service history couldn't be properly processed. Naomi frowned. What does that mean? It means our systems lost track of him. The words sounded impossible. General Whitmore's expression hardened. He spent years trying to fix the problem. Another page slid across the desk. Unanswered requests, missing paperwork, denied claims, ignored appeals. The evidence was overwhelming. Slowly, Naomi felt anger replacing shock. Walter hadn't abandoned the system. The system had abandoned him. General Whitmore studied her carefully. Then she pulled out Walter's letter, the same letter Naomi had mailed. "I've read this at least 20 times. Her voice softened. "It isn't really about Walter." Naomi looked up. "No?" The general shook her head. "It's about you." The room became very quiet. General Whitmore opened the letter. Then, read aloud. She saw a man everyone else ignored. She treated him with dignity when the country that benefited from his service forgot he existed. The words hit harder than Naomi expected. General Whitmore lowered the paper. Walter didn't want recognition. She looked directly into Naomi's eyes. He wanted accountability. A long pause followed. Then the general asked the question that would change everything. "Miss Brooks," she folded the letter carefully, "would you be willing to help me expose what happened to Walter Grayson?" Naomi didn't answer General Whitmore immediately. The question felt far bigger than she was. Expose what happened to Walter? Challenge a system that had failed him for decades? She was a 22-year-old nursing student who still worried about paying rent every month. What could she possibly do? General Whitmore seemed to read her thoughts. "You don't need to be an expert." She folded her hands on the desk. "You only need to tell the truth." 3 weeks later, Naomi sat inside a government conference room surrounded by attorneys, policy advisors, and communications specialists. The hearing was approaching quickly. Everyone wanted to prepare her. Everyone wanted to shape her story. One advisor adjusted a stack of papers. "Try to focus on Walter's service." Another nodded. "The patriotism angle is powerful." A third leaned forward. "We should probably avoid discussing your financial struggles." Naomi frowned. "Why?" The woman offered a diplomatic smile. "It can become political." Naomi stared at her. "My electricity was shut off." The room grew quiet. "I skipped meals." Another silence. "I almost got evicted." The advisors shifted uncomfortably. "We understand, but—" "No." Naomi interrupted. "If you remove that part, then you remove why Walter mattered." Nobody responded. Then General Whitmore spoke from the corner. "She's right." Every head turned. The general closed her folder. "If we erase who Naomi is, then this becomes a public relations exercise." Her voice remained calm. "And that's not why we're here." The discussion ended immediately. Nobody challenged her. The hearing was scheduled for October 14th. The night before, Naomi barely slept. She sat in a hotel room overlooking the city. Her testimony lay open on the bed. Pages of carefully prepared remarks. Yet the more she read them, the less real they felt. Eventually, her phone rang. "Mrs. Evelyn Chen." Naomi smiled. "Couldn't sleep?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Not even a little." "You nervous?" "Terrified." Mrs. Chen laughed softly. "Good." "What?" "If you're scared, it means you care." Naomi stared at the ceiling. "What if I mess this up?" Mrs. Chen's answer came instantly. "Tell the truth." "That's it?" "That's it." The next morning, Naomi entered the hearing room. Her stomach twisted. The chamber was enormous. Rows of seats, television cameras, journalists, government staff, senators. Far more people than she had ever imagined. For a moment, she felt completely out of place. A girl from a broken apartment, sitting among some of the most powerful people in the country. General Whitmore testified first. Her presentation lasted nearly an hour. She revealed portions of Walter's service history, the missions, the rescues, the years of bureaucratic failure. The room became increasingly quiet. Then came the number that shocked everyone. 43. A senator frowned. 43 what? General Whitmore looked directly at him. "We have identified 43 additional veterans with classified service records who experienced similar administrative failures." Murmurs spread throughout the room. Reporters immediately began writing. The chairman thanked the general. Then Naomi's name was called. Her legs felt weak as she approached the witness table. A microphone was positioned in front of her. The chairman smiled politely. "Miss Brooks, thank you for being here." Naomi nodded. A senator spoke first. "How did you meet Walter Grayson?" She glanced at her prepared statement, then pushed it aside. She didn't need it. "I met him at a bus stop." The room became still. Naomi told them everything. The sandwiches, the coffee, the mornings, the conversations, the loneliness, the hunger. The dignity Walter carried, despite everything. For 20 minutes, she simply told the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. Several senators appeared emotional. Others remained expressionless. Then, Senator Thomas Bradford leaned forward, older, sharp-eyed, skeptical. "Miss Brooks," his voice carried across the room, "are you suggesting taxpayers are responsible for every homeless person in America?" The question landed exactly the way he intended. Several reporters looked up, waiting, watching. Naomi felt anger rise inside her. Not explosive anger, something colder, clearer. She looked directly at him. "No, Senator." The room quieted. "I'm talking about Walter Grayson." A pause. "A man your government trusted with classified missions." Another pause. "A man who risked his life for this country." She leaned forward slightly. "I kept my promise to him with a sandwich." The room went silent. Every camera pointed toward her. Every senator watched. Naomi continued. "But the institutions that sent him into danger failed to keep theirs." The silence deepened. Even Senator Bradford had no immediate response. For the first time all morning, nobody was looking at statistics, or budgets, or policies. They were thinking about Walter, a real person, a forgotten person, exactly as Naomi intended. Then she delivered the sentence nobody would forget. "If we only care about people after we discover they were important, then we've already failed." The hearing room became completely silent. Some reporters stopped writing, simply listening. Naomi looked around the chamber, at the senators, at the cameras, at the officials, at the people who possessed the power Walter never had. Then she spoke one final truth. Walter didn't deserve dignity because he was a hero. Her voice trembled slightly. He deserved dignity because he was human. No one spoke. No one moved. For several seconds, the entire room sat frozen. Then General Whitmore slowly stood, and what she announced next would transform Walter Grayson's story into a national movement. General Eleanor Whitmore stepped toward the microphone. The room remained completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Everyone was watching. Everyone was listening. Whitmore glanced briefly toward Naomi before turning back to the committee. "Effective immediately," she announced, "the Office of Veteran Accountability will establish a dedicated task force for veterans whose classified service records created barriers to care and benefits." A ripple moved through the room. But she wasn't finished. "We are also allocating $5 million to establish the Walter Grayson Memorial Fund." The silence shattered. Reporters began writing furiously. Cameras flashed. Several senators exchanged surprised looks. The chairman raised an eyebrow. Whitmore continued. "The fund will provide emergency housing assistance, legal support, mental health services, and benefits advocacy for vulnerable veterans." She paused and smiled slightly. "And I'm appointing Naomi Brooks as Community Outreach Director." Naomi's eyes widened. "What?" For a moment, she genuinely thought she had misheard. Several reporters immediately turned toward her. Whitmore noticed the expression on Naomi's face and smiled. Someone who understands accountability should oversee the mission. The hearing ended nearly an hour later, but the story was only beginning. By evening, clips of Naomi's testimony were everywhere. Television, social media, news websites. One particular moment appeared repeatedly. The moment she said, "I kept my promise with a sandwich." Millions watched. Millions shared it. And for the first time in years, people were talking about forgotten veterans. Not politicians, not scandals, veterans. Exactly as Walter would have wanted. 6 months later, Naomi's life looked very different. Yet somehow, it felt exactly the same. She still woke up early, still drank terrible coffee, still worked long hours. Only now she divided her time between nursing and the Walter Grayson Memorial Fund. The fund had grown far beyond expectations. Private donations poured in. Veteran organizations partnered with them. Communities across the country began contributing. What started with one letter had become a national movement. One rainy afternoon, Naomi sat reviewing grant applications in her small office. There were dozens. Requests for housing, medical assistance, PTSD treatment, emergency transportation. She wished she could approve them all. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A young woman stood in the doorway, maybe 23. Army jacket, exhausted eyes, nervous posture. Naomi instantly recognized the look of someone carrying too much weight alone. "Can I help you?" The woman hesitated. "My name is Emily Dawson." She swallowed hard. "I've been trying to get my benefits sorted out for 8 months. Naomi nodded slowly. She had heard that sentence countless times. Emily lowered her eyes. "Everybody keeps sending me somewhere else." Something tightened inside Naomi's chest, because suddenly she wasn't looking at Emily anymore. She was looking at Walter, forgotten, ignored, lost inside paperwork. The same cycle repeating itself. Not today. Naomi stood, walked to the coffee machine, poured 2 cups, then returned. "Do you take it black?" Emily managed a small smile. "Lots of sugar." Naomi laughed softly. "Good answer." She handed over the coffee, then opened the worn notebook Walter had given her months before his death. The notebook she still carried everywhere. His handwriting filled every page. Names, processes, contacts, advice, lessons learned through decades of fighting bureaucracy. Naomi placed it on the desk. "We're going to fix this." Emily looked stunned. "Why would you help me?" Naomi smiled. The answer came instantly. Because she had heard it before. Because Walter had taught it to her. Because somebody once helped me understand that small things aren't small. 1 year after Walter's death, the Memorial Fund had helped more than 2,000 veterans. Housing, medical care, mental health support, benefit recovery, lives rebuilt, families reunited, hope restored. And every success traced back to one homeless man at a bus stop. A few days later, Naomi stood before Walter's grave. The military had finally corrected its mistake. He had been buried with full honors. Flags, soldiers, salutes, recognition. Everything he should have received years earlier. The headstone was simple. Walter Grayson, soldier, pilot, patriot. But Naomi knew those words only told part of the story. She knelt, placed a peanut butter sandwich beside the stone, the same kind she had brought him every morning. The autumn wind moved gently through the cemetery. For a moment, she simply sat there, remembering. The bus stop, the conversations, the laughter, the impossible stories that turned out to be true. Then she looked up toward the sky and smiled. "I kept my promise." The breeze stirred the trees overhead, almost like an answer. A year later, Congress passed the Grayson Act, requiring improved tracking and support systems for veterans with classified service records. But legislation wasn't Walter's greatest legacy. People were. Lives changed. People seen. People remembered. On a bright spring morning, Naomi found herself back at the Maple Avenue transit stop, the place where everything had begun. Beside her stood a teenage girl from a mentorship program funded by the Memorial Foundation. Naomi handed her a paper bag. Inside was a sandwich, a banana, and a bottle of water. The girl looked confused. "What's this for?" Naomi glanced toward the empty bench where Walter had once slept. Then she smiled. "It's for someone who needs it." The girl nodded slowly, still not fully understanding, but someday she would. The bus arrived. The doors opened. As they climbed aboard, Naomi looked back one final time. The bench was empty. The sidewalk was quiet. Walter was gone, but his lesson remained. Kindness doesn't need applause. Dignity doesn't need permission. And sometimes the smallest act of compassion can change a life, expose a failure, inspire a nation, and leave behind a legacy that outlives us all. And it all started with a sandwich.